Right now, your kids are probably spending more time staring at screens than they spend sleeping, and nobody's talking about what that's actually doing to their brains. I'm not here to tell you that technology is evil or that your family should go live in a cabin in the woods. That's not realistic, and frankly, it's not even the right answer. But what is happening in most homes is a complete absence of intentional design around how screens fit into daily life. And the consequences are showing up everywhere: shorter attention spans, disrupted sleep, anxiety that seems to come out of nowhere, and this weird tension where everyone feels like they're competing with a device for each other's attention. The thing is, this isn't really a problem that belongs to your kids alone. It's a family problem. And solving it requires a shift in how you think about digital habits, not just for them, but for you too. Let me paint a picture of what most evenings look like. Dad's scrolling on his phone during dinner. Mom's half watching a show on her laptop while checking email. The teenagers are texting in the group chat with their friends. The younger kids have a tablet propped up during homework. Nobody's fully present anywhere. And the weird part is that everyone feels connected to the world, but disconnected from each other in the same room. That's not an accident. That's what happens when technology gets to decide the terms of engagement instead of the family doing it. Here's what research is actually showing us. When families establish clear boundaries around screens, not restrictions, but intentional boundaries, multiple things happen at once. Sleep improves. Not just a little, but measurably. Kids' grades tend to stabilize. Family conflict actually decreases because there's less resentment around device use. And this is the surprising part. Kids who grow up with healthy digital habits become teenagers who naturally manage their own screen time without constant supervision. They develop what researchers call digital literacy, which is just a fancy way of saying they understand when technology serves them and when it's working against them. But none of that happens by accident. It happens when someone in the family decides that the default settings of the modern world aren't working anymore. Start with a real audit. Not like a judgy, guilt-inducing audit, but an honest one. For 1 week, just observe. How much time is each person actually spending on screens? Not in front of them, actually actively using them. And more importantly, what are they replacing? Are they replacing sleep? Are they replacing face-to-face conversation? Are they replacing physical activity? Are they replacing boredom, which is actually a really important state for creativity and brain development? The audit isn't about shame. It's about clarity, because you can't change what you don't measure. Now here's something most families never consider. The quality of screen time matters way more than the quantity. An hour of a kid watching educational content they're genuinely interested in is completely different from an hour of passive doom scrolling through algorithmically curated content. And 2 hours of a parent working on something meaningful is different from 2 hours of distracted social media checking. So the first real move isn't to cut everything. It's to be intentional about what stays and what goes. Device-free zones and device-free times are where this actually gets practical. And I know what you're thinking, that sounds impossible in 2024. But listen to what happens when families actually implement this. Bedrooms become places where people sleep instead of places where they scroll at midnight. Dinner tables become places where conversations actually happen instead than places where everyone's half present. The first 20 minutes after everyone gets home stops being a race to check notifications and starts being a time when you're actually together. The trick is not to make these zones and times feel like punishment. That's the big mistake families make. They set a rule and then everyone resents it. Instead, you have to design something better to fill that space. Family game night isn't a rule that replaces screen time. It's a better option that makes screen time less appealing. A walk around the neighborhood isn't a punishment for not using your phone. It's actually more interesting to a lot of people once you try it. A conversation about something that matters is more engaging than another 40 minutes of scrolling once you remember what real conversation feels like. If you're noticing that your family's relationship with screens is affecting everything from sleep to school to how you interact with each other, this is probably a good moment to think about what intentional design actually looks like. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring practical ways to build healthier patterns, not just with technology, but with how your whole family shows up for each other. There are tools and systems that make this easier than you'd think, and we're going to keep diving into what actually works. Now let's talk about the biggest barrier most families face. It's not the kids' resistance to change. It's the parents' own habits. Because here's what's really true. If you're constantly checking your phone, working on your laptop, responding to messages during family time, your kids will do exactly what you do, not what you say. They're not listening to your rules. They're watching your behavior. So any real shift in digital wellness for the family has to start with honest reflection about your own relationship with screens. This is where it gets uncomfortable for a lot of adults. We tell ourselves we're checking work email because it's important. We're scrolling because we deserve a break. We're finishing one more thing before we engage with the family. But from a kid's perspective, what they're seeing is that screens are more important than they are. That's not what you intend to communicate, but intention doesn't matter much when the message is clear from what they observe. Start with yourself first. Not perfectly. That's impossible and also not the point. But intentionally. If you decide that phones stay off the dinner table, you stay off it too. If you set a rule that screens go away an hour before bed, that means your phone too. If you create a device-free zone in the house, you follow it. That's the invisible contract that makes everything else work. Because kids are brilliant at spotting hypocrisy. They notice immediately when rules apply to them, but not to the adults in the house. What's interesting is that when parents actually do this, they often report that their own quality of life improves just as much as the kids. Sleep gets better. They read more. They have more energy. They notice things they were missing. Relationships with their partners often improve because you're actually present with each other instead of in the same room but mentally elsewhere. The devices weren't making their lives better. They were just filling the space where something better could have been. There's also something about modeling healthy boundaries that teaches kids something they desperately need to learn anyway. We're raising the first generation that's growing up in a world where the internet is constant and infinite. These kids are going to face some form of digital temptation and overuse for the rest of their lives. You can't protect them from that forever, but you can show them what healthy boundaries look like in practice. You can show them that you can have access to these tools and still choose not to be consumed by them. Let's talk about what actually works for setting boundaries with kids at different ages, because there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. With younger kids, the approach is mostly about structure and design. You're not trusting them to manage unlimited access. You're creating an environment where excessive screen time is just not possible because other things are more available and more interesting. This might mean that streaming services are only available after dinner, not before. It might mean that tablets are kept in a common area where screens are shared, not in bedrooms where they're isolated. It might mean that gaming happens on weekends, not on school nights. You're designing the environment so that the default path leads toward the habits you want. With teenagers, it's a completely different conversation. They need autonomy, and they're going to resent restrictions that feel arbitrary. So this is where the conversation becomes less about rules and more about negotiation. Why do we think this matters? What's the actual concern? What would a healthy version of this look like that doesn't feel like punishment? And then you give them agency in creating that solution. Some teenagers will surprise you with how reasonable they can be when they're included in the decision instead of having something imposed on them. This is also where you're starting to teach what healthy digital citizenship actually looks like. Not as a lecture, but as something you're working through together. What does it mean to use social media in a way that actually makes you happier instead of making you more anxious? What's the difference between using your phone as a tool and being used by your phone? How do you recognize when something's become compulsive instead of intentional? These are the actual skills they need to develop. Because they're going to be living in a world where screens are everywhere and nobody's going to be around to enforce rules for them. There's also the sleep piece, which is massive and often overlooked. The blue light from screens is messing with melatonin production, which is the hormone that tells your body it's time to sleep. But beyond the biology, there's the behavioral piece. If the last thing you do before bed is engage with something stimulating, whether that's a tense text conversation or a game or a video, your brain is wound up when it needs to be winding down. The phone in the bedroom is a compounding problem because if you wake up in the middle of the night, the immediate instinct becomes to check it. That breaks sleep cycles. The simplest intervention here is physical separation. Phones don't live in bedrooms. Period. Not for the kids. Not for you. They live in another room. Yes, that means if there's an actual emergency, someone would have to get up to check. But actual emergencies are rare, and the sleep benefit of not having that temptation right next to you is worth it. And here's what's weird. Most families report that after about 2 weeks of this adjustment, everyone sleeps better and nobody even thinks about the phone being gone. Now, let's bring in what actually happens when you start to shift these patterns. Boredom comes back. And I know that sounds negative, but it's actually one of the healthiest outcomes. Boredom is where creativity lives. It's when kids start playing an instrument, or getting back into art, or reading books, or just sitting outside and thinking. Those states of mind are increasingly rare because screens fill every available gap. But when you remove the fill, something gets created. And what's being created is often more interesting than what was on the screen. Family dynamics shift too. When you're actually present with each other instead of in competing digital worlds, you have more to talk about. Kids share more, not because you interrogate them, but because you're available and present. Parents actually know what's going on in their kids' lives because they're talking, not because they're scanning their kids' social media accounts. And that transparency comes from being together, not from surveillance. There's also a shift in how kids relate to each other. If screen time is limited and gaming is scheduled rather than constant, siblings actually interact more. They might argue, sure, but they might also play together, create things together, actually talk. That might sound boring compared to everyone in their own digital world, but those interactions are building something that screens can't: actual relationships and real memories. The business of apps and features that claim to help with digital wellness deserves a quick reality check. There are legitimate tools, screen time tracking apps, parental controls that actually work, apps that help you understand your own usage patterns. These can be useful as part of a solution, but they're not the solution by themselves. An app that limits screen time is not a substitute for actually talking about why you're limiting screen time. A parental control that blocks apps is not a substitute for helping your kids develop their own judgment about what's worth their attention. The tools can support the culture change, but they can't replace it. Where things get powerful is when the tools serve the family's intentional goals instead of the family serving the tools. So maybe use an app that shows everyone's usage so there's transparency and accountability. Maybe use a tool that helps teenagers understand their own patterns so they can make better choices. Maybe you set up your Wi-Fi to turn off at a certain time in the evening so that the boundary is structural rather than something that requires constant willpower. These are useful supports, but they're supporting a decision the family has already made about what matters. Here's something that might seem counterintuitive. Kids who grow up with healthy boundaries around screens often develop better social skills than kids who are digitally unrestricted. Why? Because they spend more time in actual social situations instead of simulated ones. They learn how to read facial expressions, how to navigate real conversation, how to sit with uncomfortable moments instead of reaching for a distraction. And when they do use social media and gaming and online spaces, they do it from a position of strength instead of compulsion. They're using the tools instead of the tools using them. The family conversation itself matters more than you might think. Not a lecture where you announce new rules, but an actual conversation. What's everyone noticing about how screens are affecting our time together? What's working? What's not? What do we want to be different? What would we need from each other to make that happen? You'd be surprised at how honest kids can be when they're invited into the problem solving instead of just being told what to do. They often have better ideas than the adults in the room. As this becomes more of a family culture rather than just a set of rules, something shifts. It becomes normal to not have your phone at dinner. It becomes normal to actually do something else in the evening instead of screen time. It becomes normal to put devices away when you're together. And when it becomes normal, it requires way less willpower to maintain. You're not constantly fighting against the default. The new default is what you've intentionally created. The resistance you'll encounter is real. Apps are designed to be compelling. The algorithms are optimized to keep you engaged. Social media is specifically engineered to be addictive. You're not imagining that it's hard. It's genuinely difficult. But that difficulty is actually information. It's telling you that these tools are powerful enough to be worth setting boundaries around. And if you're struggling, that's not a sign that this won't work. That's a sign that it matters. What happens after a few months of the shift is that families report something they didn't necessarily expect. The devices feel less urgent. The apps feel less interesting. And that's not because you've blocked access or used restrictions. It's because you've crowded out the space where compulsive use happens with something more compelling. You've got activities. You've got conversations. You've got presence. And once you remember what that feels like, screens become less necessary. Think about your current situation. What's one thing that, if it changed, would improve how your family relates to each other? Maybe it's phones off the table during one meal a day. Maybe it's one tech-free hour in the evening. Maybe it's bedrooms being screen-free. Start with something small enough that you can actually sustain it. Because this isn't about perfection. It's about direction. Small shifts that compound over time. Which of these ideas resonates most with what you're already noticing in your own family? What's the one change that would make the biggest difference? Leave your thoughts in the comments.